Hello, everyone, my good people. Let's begin with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, both now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. I said last time that we shouldn't say amen to ourselves, so I just committed that crime. So don't follow my example. Okay, what I want to do now is continue on because I'm enjoying being with you this week so much, and unfortunately, we only have 2 more days, so we're going to try to cover all the material. So we'll see how far we get today. What I want to do right now is simply review what I said about in the last video about the days of the week, to make sure that you understand what I'm talking about. There is the daily office. Every day, certain services are done. And also every week, there are a series of commemorations that are done weekly. And that's why I call that the weekly cycle. And the weekly cycle is actually embedded in the book called the Paraklitiki, also the Triodion, and also the Pentecostarion. We can talk about that another time. We'll see if we have time in the pre-recorded lectures or in the live sessions to talk about the liturgical books. And one thing I wanted to say is that thank you very much for your answers. They are very astute. You're definitely paying attention. I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. And I was able to answer all of Tuesday and Wednesday. At least when I saw Wednesday, not everyone had a chance to answer, but I will definitely look at all of them. And I want to, before the week is over, make sure that I look at all of them because I appreciate your hard work. Okay, the first thing I want to do is basically, because based on the answers to the questions, some people were a little bit confused about the days of the week. In other words, the weekly cycle. And what I mean by the weekly cycle is, and we'll explain this a little bit more later on, we have the series of 8 modes, okay? And so that's a cycle that repeats throughout the year. What is it, 8 times 7, that's 56, right? So 56, a cycle of 56 days that keeps on repeating throughout the year. So that's something else that's going on here. But I want to start by talking about every week has certain commemorations that are for every week. And I call this the weekly cycle. So I think I confused you about the Anglo-Saxon names and the pagan names of the days of the week. I wanted to make the point that the further away you get from, let's say, Palestine and where Christianity started, the more pagan things can get. That's the point I wanted to make. An Anglo-Saxon language like English basically is still using pagan names for the days of the week. That's the point I wanted to make. Whereas in Russian and in Greek and in other Orthodox languages, I'm assuming in Armenian also, and probably Coptic, but you can correct me on that. Mr. Musa can correct me on that. In other words, in Arabic. But what we have is the days of the week have been renamed with reference to the Lord's Day. Lord's Day being the first day, second day, third day. So in some of those regions, the old pagan names, because the Greeks had pagan names too for the days of the week. That's the point I want to make. Some of those pagan names were abandoned, and the days of the week were renamed with reference to the day of the Lord. And that's why in Greek, we have the day of the Lord, Sunday, okay, day of the Lord, and then the second day, third day, fourth day, right? Fifth day is called the day of preparation. That's the day before the Sabbath, and the Sabbath, still called Sabbath, and the Sabbath and Sunday. Sunday is not a new Sabbath, but Sabbath still retains its value, but in a new way, a new Christianized way. A new content is given to it. It's not a day where you are idle, but a day where we worship and remember, the martyrs, but we'll talk about that again. So forget the pagan names. I just wanted to make a point there, but let us just make sure that we understand the way we Orthodox look at these days. Each of these days are actually commemorating something very specific. So Sunday, obviously, the Lord's Day is commemorating, now we know, the resurrection after Pascha and Sunday basically got combined, right? Monday is dedicated in the Orthodox Church every week to the angels. Okay. Tuesday is dedicated every week to the prophets and the par excellence prophet, who is the missing link, or what's the word? The link basically between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the last prophet. Okay, and the only prophet that was prophesied by other prophets, St. John the Baptist. So every Tuesday, St. John the Baptist and all the prophets are commemorated. And as I say, the book that is blind to the specific fixed date of the month, okay, but is always aware of whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, is the Pentecostarian, but mainly the Paraklitiki, also called the Oktoichos. Okay, so maybe we'll get time, we'll see, maybe by the last lecture, to speak about the liturgical books. I know some of you know a lot about these books, even though most people simply click the Google thing and they get e-matins or whatever, and everything, all the work's been done for you. So if there's no internet, we're going to forget how to do our services, basically. So we're losing this art of being able to actually, get our hands dirty and use the books. Okay, so Monday, angels, always. Tuesday, all the prophets and St. John the Baptist, always. Wednesday and Friday, the fast. Really, we're going to talk about what that is in a second. It's really commemorating both the Theotokos and Christ, because they are both examples of self-emptying. We'll get there, and we'll talk about why we fast. Okay, Thursday, the apostles and the par excellence successor of the apostles, Saint Nicholas. Why par excellence successor of the apostles? Because all bishops are supposed to be successors of the apostles, the so-called apostolic succession, right, that we believe in. So the main job of the bishop is to preach the gospel, not to be an administrator. Okay? And the fact of the matter is, he got kicked out of his real role, which was to be at the center, istipon ke topon Christou, as a type of Christ, in the middle of the synthronon, where you already have an image of the kingdom and the end, where we're all going to be around Christ. And that's what the job of the bishop is, really to foster that kind of unity of the body of Christ. Okay? Once that throne in the back was disappeared and this whole imagery disappeared, he was kicked out of the altar, in a sense, because his main job was to be the par excellence president of the Eucharistic assembly. And that denoted that he was in the center and up on that throne. Okay? The throne in the altar. In other words, that liturgically, he is the man. Okay? Along with everyone else. And by the way, in the ancient church, there was no concern about who has more and less authority, but how all the ministries interplay. Okay? We talked about this a little bit. But in any case, in a sense, he got kicked out of the altar and ended up becoming a despot, right? He ended up being on the emperor's throne, because the throne of the bishop now is where the emperor's throne was in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Okay, so in a sense, he became from the sort of like par excellence president of the Eucharistic assembly. Okay, that the earlier architecture and placement and arrangement of the church emphasized. From that, he ended up becoming what? An administrator. And he gets the name despot. In other words, because with the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the emperor, he took on both roles. You know what we say at the end of liturgy? Ton despotin ke archiereaimon Kyrie ton despotin ke archierea, the despot and archpriest. He's talking about two people. But now he's assimilated both roles. And after the fall of Constantinople, he took on and wears the crown of the emperor. You never see an icon of a bishop in Byzantine times wearing that crown. That crown belongs to the emperor. But he took on both roles, and the sakos that he wears also was imperial garb, not vestments per se. All of our vestments, in fact, really, most of them do come from imperial garb anyway. Okay, that's a story for another day. We can talk about that another time. So he got kicked out of the altar, being the sort of par excellence president of the Eucharistic Assembly, and ended up becoming an administrator. And then we see the priest as the father. So the bishop was in the role of that father role, that he is the person you look up to. And that's where the name Pope comes from. Papa, okay? Papas, Baba, Daddy, right? Okay, the name remains, but the role has changed in any sense, in any case. Okay, great. That's something we can talk about. Food for thought, okay? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Okay, the point I wanted to make is, please, listen to me. St. Nicholas, all bishops on their icon, what do they have? The only people on icons that hold the Scripture in their hand are Christ and the bishops. The Christ, apostles, and bishops. Why? Because their role is to continue. In other words, the role of the apostles is to spread the word. That's what the word means. Apostello. I'm sent out to preach the word. That's their main job. And the bishops, as successors of the apostle, their main job is to preach the word, not to administrate. Okay. In any case, later on things changed. That's a story for another day. We can talk about that if you want. I don't want to be provocative or anything, but I think, this is the opportunity to think about these things, at least think about them, okay? So Saint Nicholas is commemorated every Thursday throughout the week. What a special saint. Why? He really is the epitome of what a bishop is supposed to be and what a successor of the apostles is supposed to be. How so? He loved children. He took care of the poor, okay? The stockings and all that kind of stuff for Santa Claus. Santa Claus is Agis Nikolaos, St. Nicholas. Why do we have stockings and we put stuff in them? Because he saved some girls from being sold to slavery, praying and knowing their problem. And he would secretly at night stick his hand in the window and, throw in some socks with money to prevent these kinds of, atrocities, put it this way. Okay, so he did this kind of stuff. And therefore, he is seen as the model for what all bishops are supposed to be, but not only all bishops, all Christians. Okay, very nice. Thursday. Friday. We talked about Wednesday and Friday. We're going to talk about that separately in a second. Okay. You see how we're unfolding the liturgical, cycle of what we do throughout the week, throughout the year. And it's all going back to the Paschal mystery, really. Okay. It's all going back to laying your life for the other. Okay. That's what it all is. It's all one mystery. Okay. But it's nice for people to have that white light go through the prism. And so we can see these things sort of like these aspects of the one mystery, not as individual things isolated from the rest, but as part of the one mystery of Christ. I love it. Okay. Friday, the name means the day of preparation for the Sabbath. And then the Sabbath, we know what the Sabbath really means, right? Now, because we know what the Sabbath really means. In the first video, I believe I did read from one of the hymns from Holy Saturday where it says, this is the real Sabbath. All the other stuff was a type. It's not like the Sabbath happened back then, and now this is imitating that Sabbath that God created the world in 7 days. We know he didn't create it in 7 days. This is not history. This is theology. Give me a break, you Bible Belt people. So he says that all that was that was a type, right? Type referring to the real thing, and the real thing is Christ in the tomb, where he's not idle, but where he's really creating the human being. That's why in John chapter 9, when he heals the blind man, I mentioned this in the first video, he spits. He doesn't just say, you're healed. he spits on the ground, makes mud, and puts it in the eyes to absolutely emphasize this idea of on the Sabbath, and it was on the Sabbath, we fulfill, or how do you say, we supplement what is missing in the human being. That's what the job of the Sabbath is, to make us truly human. And that's what is happening in the tomb, which actually is a womb. And that's why, by the way, Christmas is, how rude. When I am dealing with you people are the most important thing in the world. I'm going to ignore all of these nonsense calls. They're just trying to sell something, I'm sure. Nativity, it's a later feast. Didn't exist in the beginning. It's part of the unfolding. And the unfolding that comes again from the Paschal mystery. You don't believe me? You think that it's, 9 months after the Annunciation. Annunciation was the 25th of March, and therefore 9 months after that is 25th of December. Baloney. The 5th century, the 4th century, 5th century, you begin to see these kinds of Marian feasts. What was happening before? Nativity first started in the West, but then it ended up coming to the East later on. And the date of December 25th is actually picked because on the year when Christ was crucified, 14 to 15 Nisan actually happened to be the 25th of March. So that means that the starting point is the Paschal mystery, the conception. And then 9 months after the conception is the tomb, which actually is a womb. So Christ lying in the tomb on the Sabbath, that's the beginning of everything. That's the beginning of the creation of the human being. That's the beginning of the whole story. That's the beginning of the nativity. It's not like nativity happened, and then at the end of his life, in the year 33, he was crucified and resurrected. Okay, we see things backwards from God's point of view. It was not like this, because it was the plan from the very beginning. The Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, right? Before there are even humans. You guys think that it's because of sin and this and that. Well, when there's no humans to sin yet, how could that be possible? You Bible Belt people? Anyway, you have me on a roll. Okay, and then finally we have Saturday. And Saturday we, first of all, originally would commemorate the martyrs, because the martyrs are the par excellence examples of what it means to be a human being. Purpose of life is not to be married. Purpose of life is not to be a monk. The purpose of life, none of these things are higher or lower. Whatever makes you lay your life for the other, that's the purpose of life, is to become human. We start off as male and female, but we end up as human. Not that we lose being male and female. We could talk about that another time if you want. But the whole point is that these things are there to help us learn how to become human. Okay, but the goal is we start out as Adam, as it were, who's a type, and we have to end up as Christ. Anyway, so the par excellence example are the martyrs, because that's the purpose of life, to be a martyr. That is to say, to lay your life for the other, to lay your life for Christ and his gospel. Those who gain their lives lose their lives. Those who lose their lives for the sake of the Christ and the gospel, they gain their lives, right? So on the Saturday, we commemorate all the dead, because and first of all, the martyrs, but then the ascetics and everyone else and everyone. And that's why we have Saturdays of Souls on Saturday. And Saturday, the service is actually based on Holy Saturday, because Holy Saturday, the structure of the Orthodox of Holy Saturday is what we have on all Saturdays, but also the funeral service is based on the Orthodox of Saturday/Holy Saturday, because we want our death to be connected with the life-giving death of Christ, because that's the whole point of the Sabbath, that's how we can become a truly human being. In other words, the Sabbath is when he kept on getting in trouble with the Jews in John's gospel. Why? To make a point. With the paralytic, he said, what? My Father's working and so am I. In other words, the real purpose of the Sabbath is not to be idle, but to make the human being. And that is seen, that reality is seen when Christ is lying in the tomb. In other words, my strength is made perfect in weakness. That's how he creates the human being. What a miracle. Rather than creating the human being by being a Zeus and powerful. When I'm not powerful, I don't have any part of it. He does it in a way that allows everyone to share, because we all are weak. Even though we think we're strong, we're dead, and that's weak. Okay, so he used that. Okay, we've said this many times, and I'm sorry for repeating. So Saturday, the commemoration of all the dead, and that's why technically you're not supposed to be memorial services on a Sunday. On Sunday, you're not supposed to do anything penitential. On Sunday, you're not supposed to kneel. There are canons about this. Okay, the Sunday is always the resurrection. Saturday and Sunday are both liturgical days, and even during Great Lent, you are allowed to do real liturgies. Okay, we'll talk about Wednesday and Friday and the pre-sanctified and all that in a while, in a little bit. Okay, very nice. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say, that maybe I didn't make it clear, is that this hierarchy, Christ, and then Wednesday, Friday is Panagia. We'll get to that in a second, and cross. So Christ, Panagia, cross, and then Monday, angels, and then prophets, and then apostles, and then on Saturday, martyrs. This is the architecture of the church. In other words, this is the program of the iconography of the church. It always follows this program, starting from Christ and ending up at our level with the martyrs, because the martyrs show us what it means to be, how we can become finally human. Okay, that's the crux of the whole thing. Okay, very nice. All right, let's talk about Wednesdays and Fridays, because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding here. First of all, in the Diaconate, which is, like I say, a very early document that basically seems to simply be a Jewish document, because it was really a Jewish Christian. There was very early Christians that were actually Jews who had become Christians. Okay, just like the apostles, the disciples. It says there in the Diaconate, this first century document, don't let your fasts be with the hypocrites, for they fast on the second day and the fifth day of the week, but you shall fast on the fourth and on the day of preparation, which means the second day is Monday, right? And the fifth day is Thursday. So you know how in the account of the publican and the Pharisee, the Pharisee was so proud of himself. He said, thank God I'm not like this other guy. I'm so great. I fast twice a week. So it's referring to the Pharisees' fast. So not all Jews were doing this, but it was like a pious tradition. First of all, fasting is something that's universal with, when I say religion, you remember that Christianity is not a religion. It's religion fulfilled, religion ended, religion, how do you say, basically ended. In any case, fasting is something that intuitively people always knew is good for them. Feasting is good for us too. So the tension between fasting and feasting is always something that is very evident in different religions. Okay, so why? Because it's good for you. So that's there. And the Jews, it wasn't a universal thing, but there was this habit amongst the Pharisees who were kind of like trying to, how do you say, rejuvenate, the faith. So there's a sense in which, Christ was a Pharisee too, in the sense that lay people kind of like going out, they're not part of the Sadducees or the priests, right? And the priests were connected only to the temple, and they were hereditary. In any case, the Pharisees were kind of like trying to bring back, a more pure kind of like, how do you say, keeping of the Jewish faith. In any case, but they ended up falling into problems because of all kinds of, legalisms and hypocrisies that Christ, preached against. In any case, the 2-day fast during the week, it seems that the Pharisees were doing Mondays and Thursdays. It was not prescribed for all people, and that's why he was condemning the simple Jews. Thank God I'm not like these simple people that don't fast. I fast twice a week, okay? So it's referring to this fast. So it turns out that this was not universal, first of all, but also some Jews were fasting on, were actually had Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday as special days, okay? And perhaps fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays. So this is new scholarship, and it has to do with the way the calendar, the lunar and solar calendar was working. And according to this theory, the year had 364 days, that is to say 52 weeks of 7 days. And according to this theory, festivals always fell on the same day every year. And the first day of the month was always on a Wednesday. And other special days were Friday, like Pentecost, and the Day of Atonement, which is the most holy feast for the Jews, was always on a Friday. So to make a long story short, the theory is that Wednesdays and Fridays were special, and that this could have caused that it seems that some Jews were fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays. So the most common way of looking at this line from the Didachi, do not let your fasts be like the hypocrites, in other words, was just to distinguish themselves over the Jews. So that could be part of it, but some Jews, like the Qumran, community, the Dead Sea Scrolls, it seems that they were fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays. So this is just a fun fact, and I'm giving you kind of like the most current research in order to kind of like keep you informed that it's not oftentimes what we say, that the Jews were simply fasting on Mondays and Thursdays, and we decided on Wednesdays and Fridays in order to distinguish ourselves over against them. That could be partially true, but it's if you look at the whole horizon of what's going on, there was a great deal of variety. That's the only point I want to make. Because these days were considered as holy, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays in some Jewish circles, Sunday already was a holy day because of the resurrection and because of, the eighth day and all that kind of stuff. And the Eucharist was always being celebrated on it, as we said. However, we begin to see later on, around the time of, some of the early fathers like the Tertullian, and some of the early ancient church orders, like these things I'm mentioning, Didachi, Didascalia Apostolorum. These are called early church orders, and they kind of like give a description of what was going on. It seems that in some churches, Wednesdays and Fridays, there would be a sort of like a congregation in the evening where the scripture would be studied. Okay, so something of a liturgy of the word, kind of like without the Eucharistic part, because the idea was that the actual Eucharist is the par excellence opposite of fasting. So on a fast day, you cannot have the Eucharist. And that's where you begin to see in some places, the idea of to make this, to maintain this idea of these being holy days, and it would be nice to have the Eucharist, but you can't have a liturgy and a consecration, right? Because that is festive, and that's a foretaste of the kingdom. We're already in the kingdom. You can't be fasting in the kingdom because it's the end, right? It's, in other words, the whole, it's not the journey where you're going to be struggling to get there, but it's the joy of the kingdom and unity with Christ and life and so on and so forth. Okay, so fasting and Eucharist or divine liturgy, so penitential exercises like fasting and the actual Eucharist, which is the kingdom, are incompatible. So in the early church, this distinction was more clear. In any case, what you begin to see is in some churches this idea of a priest sanctified on Wednesdays and Fridays, because they're fast days, in order to receive communion, to make it the day somehow special, but you cannot have a full liturgy. Okay, so that's something you find. So in this way, we can see that Wednesdays and Fridays from a very early time were considered to be special. Now, we like to say today that, Wednesday was the day when Christ was betrayed, and Friday was the day when Christ was crucified. The first time you see this kind of like, let's say, justification for Wednesday and Friday, because it's obvious that already there's something special about it before we get this kind of, justification, is in the Didascalia Apostolorum was a 3rd century document, and it makes this comparison saying that according to the chronology, Wednesday would have been the time when Christ was betrayed, and Friday would have been the time when Christ was crucified. Fine. There's more, though, regarding Wednesday and Friday, and that is the following. You find that there's no real stress on this idea of betraying and crucifying really in the hymnology, at least not that I have seen. And when I talk about the hymnology, which hymnology? A Meneon doesn't know what day it is. It doesn't know if it's Wednesday or Friday. The only book that knows and is, aware of whether it's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, as I said, the only liturgical book would be the hymnal called the Oktoichos or the Paraklitiki. Two ways of saying the same exact thing. We could talk about this another time. In any case, in the hymnology connected with Wednesdays and Fridays in this liturgical book or this hymnal, okay, that has the hymns for these days of the week, there's no mention of betrayal and crucifixion, but there is mention of something else universally, and that is what? The cross and the Theotokos. Why? Because both of them are seen as examples of what? Par excellence, examples of what the human is all about, self-emptying, laying your life for the other. So both the cross, obviously, is self-emptying, but also the Theotokos, she emptied herself to make space for God. What could be more self-emptying than that? Think about it. So, and also we read in Luke 2:34 that, she suffered in the sense that this was very difficult. She said yes to this plan of God, but, it's like, I'm going to give birth to your son. Couldn't you at least, offer me maybe an inn? In other words, she gave birth in a cave, right? She could have said, everything was so ambiguous. Think about it. Here she is saying yes to this plan. And, we think that, you do God's will and God will give you blessings. Yes, he will give you blessings. But we don't do God's will to get blessings. We do God's will because we love him, regardless of what we're going to get back. Because looking at things in terms of what we're going to get back is paganism. I go to church so I can be blessed. So little Johnny can go to Harvard, whatever. Okay? So we're talking about the cross. We're talking about laying your life for the other. We're talking about crucified love. Okay? So crucified love, the best example of that is obviously Christ on the cross and also the Panagia. So every Wednesday and Friday, we commemorate both the cross and the Panagia. And that's why we have special hymns called Stavro Theotokia. Okay? And in Luke chapter 2:34, it says the following: this child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which will be spoken against, and yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul. Also, referring to the Panagia, it's painful to give birth to God. It's painful to be a Christian. It's painful to, in church, despite all of social media and what society is saying, to make space and actually give birth, be a Theotokos, give birth to God in our society, right? To make him a reality, to make him a physical reality, an incarnate reality. That's our job. Our job is, that's why the Panagia, as well as the bride of Christ coming out of the side, but the Panagia also is an example of, she symbolizes the church. She symbolizes what we are, because we're supposed to be incarnating Christ, giving birth to Christ. We're supposed to be Theotoki. We're supposed to be bearers of God. That's our job. Otherwise, what's the use of being in church, right? If a salt loses its saltiness, what are you going to do with it? Throw it out, okay? So these are important issues. Let me finally read this thing because I could keep on interrupting myself. I'm sorry. This child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which will be spoken against. And yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. I love it. Everything changes with Christ. Everything. Everything. So this is commemorated on every Wednesday and Friday, the self-emptying of the Theotokos, because she definitely emptied herself to make space for, she's wider than wide, right? Platiteraton uranon. How can you make space for God? You empty yourself without losing yourself. It's not something that's, bad and negative. We make space for God. We actually become who we were supposed to be from the very beginning, because that's what God wants. Story for another day. Okay, so the cross obviously is the great balancer, because it's the beginning of history in that sense, because as we said, it's the beginning of the Paschal mystery, and everything explodes from this point, right? That's what we're learning, and that's what we see, hopefully, in this class. And the cross is the great divider in the sense that everyone is on either side of the cross. They can be on the side of the thief that's blaming everyone else, not taking up his own responsibility. and the other one who says, Lord, remember me in your kingdom. In other words, those who take up, the responsibility for what they've done and so on and so forth, and admit that, they deserve it in a sense. Okay. Those who self-empty and those who don't. Those who blame everyone else and all my problems are because of everyone else are those people who basically don't empty themselves. They don't make space for, the grace of God. They blame everyone else, right, for their situation. Whereas others say that, you know what, I'm in God's hands. Anyway, one more note on fasting. We talked about fasting, that fasting is good and all that kind of stuff. There are different kinds of fasting, by the way. The original idea of fasting was fasting means no food. Okay, so especially the fast we talked about on the 14 Nisan day, leading to the vigil that breaks the fast, the original celebration of Pascha. That kind of fasting is only one day, which means that you can just not eat. In fact, the idea there is not necessarily sadness, but I'm in love. I'm expecting the bridegroom. I'm looking out the window and I have no appetite to eat. So you're not interested in food. So that's called an anticipatory fast. So we have that. Like, for instance, before Holy Communion, we fast from midnight to the morning. But on Saturday night, we don't worry about what we eat, because Saturday is not a fasting day, except for one exception. Of course, some people have changed this nowadays. After 400 years under the Turks, these things have, atrophied. Because the canons say we're not allowed to fast on Saturday, and other canons say we have to receive communion on Sunday. And therefore, if you tell me that you have to fast on Saturday to receive Holy Communion on Sunday, well, that's what some of your yayadas say, but it's not their fault. But it's coming from a long tradition of basically 400 years under the Turks, where the original meaning of these things were forgotten. Story for another day. The point I wanted to make was that's an example of an anticipatory fast, where you're not worried about what kind of food you're eating, but you're not eating anything. Okay, but that's easy, right? From midnight to the morning, big deal, right? But there are other examples like this early, Paschal fast, okay, for 14 Nisan. Okay, once things expand, okay, so maybe 3 days you can do it, but once things expand to, like the week-long Holy Week, and then we're going to talk about Great Lent, how that gets appended onto the whole system, because that's something different. Remember, Great Holy Week and Great Lent are two different things. Okay, we sometimes lump them all together. That's wrong, because we're all only concerned about our stomach. Because I'm fasting, I'm miserable, and it's all put in lumped together as, oh, Great Lent, whatever. Okay, Holy Week has a totally different, purpose and concentration than what we're doing during Great Lent. In Great Lent, we're concentrating on ourselves, and our own spiritual development and so on and so forth. Whereas during Holy Week, we are concentrating on Christ only, okay, not on ourselves. In any case, the point I want to make is that we have the anticipatory fast, which are short and basically involve no eating at all. And then we have something else called, once these fasts expand and you have a long period of 40 days or 50 days or 58 days, if you don't eat, you die. So you have to eat, but what you do is you change the way you eat and the actual ingredients of what you eat, and how often you eat, and the quality of the food, okay? But you're eating, okay? So that's called an ascetic fast, because once you have something like that, it's an ascetic exercise throughout a longer time, okay? Where you're actually not simply not eating, but you're changing, the quality and the way and the amount and so on and so forth, okay? So these are two different things, and we've forgotten this, distinction today, pretty much. In any case, very nice. Now, almost all our fasts are seen in the context of asceticism, okay? But that was not the early church, okay? The early church was more interested in eschatology. In other words, where is this leading to? Or it's not about, I'm sad, therefore I'm not eating, but I'm in love, and that kind of thing, okay? So, things we could talk about. Okay, great. Maybe I'll say a few more things, and I think that this lecture can end, so we can go on to the next thing, and we have one more day after this. So we talked about the weekly, and then to mention about the monthly, we can say the following. The monthly are every month. Basically, we have these books called Minea, and they are the hymnals that deal with the fixed feasts for the month. Okay, so let's leave that for later and just leave it at that. And then the yearly is basically every year is going to be slightly different because it's going to have a different interplay of all these different things coming together: the daily, the weekly, the monthly, and then the movable feasts and the fixed feasts. Okay, so now we're almost at the point where we can begin to understand the whole system. So what do we have here? We have, 1 second, before I talk about the movable and fixed, let me just say one thing, that for the yearly cycle, the whole year, we really have 3 cycles. There's more than 3 cycles, but mainly we have 3 cycles that are interacting. And that is the fixed, the movable, and the 8-week cycle of 8 modes going throughout the year. And we said that will be a 56-day cycle, and that's constantly repeating, okay? Where every week, one of the 8 modes, and 8 modes, obviously the symbolism is the 8th day. Okay, so everything is somehow colored by the Paschal mystery, right? The crucifixion and resurrection, which is one mystery, right? Trampling upon death by death. That's what we say on Pascha, right? We don't ignore the cross. This is not like it's 2 different things. The cross is there, it's the human part, he's dead, and the resurrection is the divine part, because that wouldn't do us any good, because he got out of the grave because he was God, right? So it's one person, one mystery, okay? So I need to stress that again and again and again, because otherwise it's Nestorianism. 2 people, the human guy over there and the divine guy over here, and then, you know, in Pascha they happen to come together, but it still doesn't affect us. No, we're saying it's absolutely affecting us because he's a human being exactly like us, okay? And he's not, you know, 2 human beings inside there, right? Any case, let's talk about the movable. The movable obviously is concerned with the centrality of Pascha again, okay? So from this Pascha, everything explodes, okay? So what do you have? You have feasts that are connected with Pascha, like Ascension is 40 days after Pascha. Pentecost is 50 days after Pascha. And this whole kind of like cycle, really, you begin to see it, how do you say, every year it's going to shift according to the date of Pascha, and that affects, there's a whole apparatus where there's Pascha, but before Pascha, there is the Triodion that also is connected with Pascha. So when the Triodion starts, in other words, the Triodion, which is the book that deals with the pre-Lenten and then the Lenten kind of stuff, okay, that whole apparatus is affected by the date of Pascha. So this whole thing moves backwards and forwards every year, depending on when Pascha is celebrated. And we said that Pascha will be celebrated on the first Sunday after the spring equinox, after the full moon on that month. Okay, that's the way it's figured out. We don't really do it that way, so we do it wrong. So we can't be too triumphalistic about this, because we use the old calendar, which is 13 days behind, okay, and we use the date of March 21st as the spring equinox, but March 21st on the old calendar is like April 3rd, because it's 13 days late, which means if you go outside and see if the sun is rising at 6 a.m. and setting at 6 p.m., it's not. So it's not an equinox. So we're not following the rules, but we're stuck on calendars, right? We're stuck on technology. A calendar is just a technology. And the conversations in the First Ecumenical Council had nothing to do with which technology you use. You use the best you can. That's why, guess what? Bishops use Mercedes-Benz, okay? Well, they didn't have Mercedes-Benz back then, did they? So they are able to use a new and better technology, right? Rather than using what they used to use back then, right? So why use the calendar of back then and be stuck on that? Story for another day. I don't mean to be provocative, but I just wanted to mention that. The good thing about it is that we all celebrate Pascha together. So for the movable feasts, we actually use the old calendar. We don't use an equinox. We use an imaginary date, which is actually April 3rd, which is not an equinox because it's 21st of March on the old calendar, which has had because of its inaccuracy, it has been, how do you say, drifting. It's been drifting, and no calendar is perfect, and even the calendar we use, the Gregorian, that's not perfect, and it drifts too. Okay, so it's difficult to have a perfect technology. Okay, but we get better and better and better, but we're not married to either one technology or the other. Okay, so we can't worship the technology, we need to worship God. Story for another day. Let me just say two things about Great Lent. Okay, originally there might have been a 40-day fast after the Pentecost period. Sorry, I correct myself. After Theophany, because after Theophany in the scriptures, Christ went out into the desert for 40 days and was tempted by the devil, right? So that seems to be something that was perhaps going on in Egypt. And so this idea of 40 days of fasting after, Theophany in January was a thing. Okay. Later on, it gradually got attached to the period before Holy Week. Why? Because Holy Week became the par excellence time. Pascha became the par excellence day for baptizing, catechumens. Okay, so it seemed to fit that everyone would be fasting and praying, and the catechumens also would be fasting and praying, and we would be praying over them and exorcising them. Okay, so to prepare them to be baptized on Pascha. So it made sense that this 40-day fast, whatever its origins was, ended up being connected with the preparation of catechumens. And once the catechumens disappeared and we have all infant baptism for the most part, this idea of, being intensely kind of like, how do you say, involved in the faith right before Pascha was transferred to all the faithful. And that's why it became a time for us to, in a sense, renew our own baptismal vows. Let's put it this way, and remember what it is to become a human being and why we were baptized, to die with Christ and put on Christ, and die with Christ and rise with Christ. As St. Paul says, if we have died with Christ, surely we shall rise with him, he says, puts it in the future. Okay, so that's the beginning of the sacramental anticipation of our life, of taking up our cross and laying our life for the other, and learning how to become like Christ, learning how to become human. Okay, another thing I want to say, and we'll end for today, is the fixed feasts. Why do we have fixed feasts? Because they mainly began to evolve as a result of specific days where martyrs were martyred, where martyrs showed us how to become human. They were born as human beings, as St. Ignatius of Antioch said, as he was in chains being led from Asia Minor all the way to Rome. He said to the authorities, don't bribe the authorities, don't kill me, allow me to be born as a human being. Okay, in other words, he was referring to the idea that I'm not a human being yet, I'm not born yet. Okay, so in other words, these things are and that he's part of the Johannine school. So this stuff is really important. In any case, because of the connection of this idea of martyrdom with being human, and in order to remember that this is what we're doing sacramentally in the Eucharist too, not only in baptism, but also in the Eucharist. Can you drink the cup that I'm about to drink? Can you be baptized in the baptism I'm about to be baptized in? In other words, a reference to baptism and Eucharist, that the Eucharist also is a sacramental anticipation of us taking up our cross, laying our life for others, and becoming human. So we're being humanized, right? It's the womb that's forming us. We're not human yet. Okay, so to connect the divine liturgy with this idea of martyrdom, originally we would have places where you have martyrs being martyred. That would become the altar table. In other words, his grave would be the place where we make the church. But that's not always convenient. So the first step was going to where the martyrs were, make a church there, okay? And also commemorating that martyr on that day of his death, because the day of his death is his day of his birth. That's his birthday, really, right? So rather than doing that, what they ended up doing later on was bringing the relics of that martyr to the place where we want to build the church. Okay, that's more convenient, and that's what we have today. So to this day, we have what? We have altar tables that have to be a consecrated altar table. They have to have real martyrs or saints relics, which means that it connects what we're doing in the Eucharist with this idea of the purpose is to become human. In other words, the purpose is to live that life. Okay, so the Eucharist is a sacramental, just like baptism, a sacramental anticipation of us taking up our cross and becoming human. This is the purpose of church. Okay, so the fixed feasts are those specific days that those saints were martyred. Okay, and that leads to, as I say, these specific calendar dates that that don't change. They're not affected by Pascha. So these things are sliding backwards and forwards, right? Because the movable feasts connected with Pascha are different every year, and then the other one is stable, right? In other words, the fixed feasts. So that's basically what we have. So maybe that's a good place to end, because I think we covered a lot. And next time we can actually go through what ended up happening regarding, how these cycles all kind of like come together, and what is the so-called Dodeka Eorto, in other words, the 12 feasts. Of course, Pascha is outside of time, so it's not included, but it's right in the middle. Okay, we'll talk about that. The 12 main feasts, and then kind of like, and these 12 main feasts include fixed and movable. So that's an interesting thing. We can look at it next time. Thank you for your attention. God bless you. I look forward to speaking with you live and discussing some of these things on Thursday. So this is the Thursday lecture for you. Thank you very much. God bless you.